The very thing that makes you feel most alone is the same thing that makes you most awake. You see what others refuse to see, and that terrifying clarity. It's not your curse, it's your calling. You're at another gathering, smiling at conversations that feel hollow. You nod along to small talk that makes your soul ache. Everyone seems so content with the surface. But you can't unsee what's underneath. There's this moment, maybe you've felt it when you're surrounded by people, yet you feel more alone than when you're actually by yourself. You watch friends scroll through their phones while pretending to listen. You see colleagues perform interest in meetings about nothing. You witness family members argue about politics they don't truly understand just to feel anything that resembles passion. And you realize, I don't belong here. Not because you're broken, but because you see the brokenness everywhere else. Schopenhauer knew this weight. Almost all of our sorrows spring out of our relations with other people. He watched the same theater of pretense, the same desperate scrambling for approval, the same soul-crushing conformity that passes for civilization. Yet Jung whispered something different. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who they want you to be, not who you think you should be, who you actually are beneath all the layers of social programming. This is where it begins, the recognition that your discomfort isn't dysfunction. It's discernment. Here's what nobody tells you about intelligence. It's not just about solving problems or understanding complex ideas. It's about seeing through the masks everyone wears. And once you see them, you can't pretend they're not there. Society has trained us to perform, to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, to care about things that don't matter, to chase validation from people who are themselves desperately seeking validation. It's an endless cycle of performance, and somewhere along the way, you started to feel like you were suffocating in it. Meet Sharon, 32, brilliant software engineer. She sits in team meetings, watching colleagues compete over who can appear most engaged. She sees the exhaustion behind their forced enthusiasm, the way they check their phones during mandatory fun events, the hollow laughter that echoes in conference rooms designed to look innovative but feel sterile. Sharon notices how her manager speaks differently when executives are present, voice-pitched higher opinions, suddenly more agreeable personality dissolved into corporate speak. She watches her teammates perform collaboration while secretly resenting each other. She sees the whole elaborate dance of professional personas and wonders, is anyone actually here? But when she stops participating in the performance, when she chooses authenticity over approval, when she speaks honestly instead of strategically, suddenly she's labeled difficult, not a team player, antisocial. This is the Carl Jung shadow at work, not the darkness we fear in ourselves, but the truth we're afraid to acknowledge about the world around us. Your persona, the mask you wear to fit in, is at war with your shadow, which sees exactly how empty these social rituals have become. You're torn between two unbearable choices: betray yourself to belong or honor yourself and stand alone. It's the fundamental split that tears at every intelligent person who's ever tried to function in a society built on collective delusion. Part of you still remembers what connection used to feel like, those rare moments of recognition when someone actually saw you instead of their projection of who you should be. But another part, the part that's growing stronger, recognizes that most social connection is just elaborate loneliness disguised as togetherness. You call it empathy. But maybe it's the way you disappear. When you can see how desperately everyone is performing, you start to perform empathy too. You become an emotional shapeshifter, giving people what they need to hear, reflecting back their projected hopes and fears. You mirror their energy, validate their illusions, support their self-deceptions, and slowly, incrementally, you vanish into the reflection. This is why intelligent people seem to not care about social life. It's not that they don't care about people, it's that they can't stand the theater anymore. They can't pretend that surface-level interaction is connection when they can see the emotional starvation underneath. Schopenhauer saw this as a tragic fate, the intelligent mind condemned to solitude, because it sees too clearly to participate in the collective delusion. But Jung saw something else entirely. He saw this conflict as the first step toward individuation, toward becoming who you actually are beneath all the layers of social conditioning. The Carl Jung Shadow Work begins when you stop apologizing for seeing what others refuse to see, when you stop pretending their masks are their faces, when you honor your perceptions instead of dismissing them as oversensitivity. Here's the truth that will either devastate you or set you free. You're not rejecting people. You're rejecting the false rituals society insists define relationship. Think about your last social media scroll. How many posts were authentic expressions versus carefully curated performances? Jung would say this digital age has taken the persona, the social mask, and turned it into a full-time job. We're not just performing in person anymore. We're performing our entire lives, creating highlight reels of experiences we barely felt because we were too busy documenting them. The algorithm rewards performance over presence, engagement over authenticity, reaction over reflection. People curate their lives like museum exhibits, everything perfect, nothing real. And those who can see through the curation feel increasingly isolated, wondering if they're the only ones who remember what authenticity looks like. The Carl Jung Shadow contains everything we've rejected about ourselves to fit in. But what happens when the thing you're rejecting isn't darkness, it's clarity? What happens when your shadow contains not your worst impulses, but your most honest perceptions? Jack, a marketing executive, describes his revelation. I realized I wasn't antisocial. I was allergic to falseness. I could feel the energy shift when people switched into their performance mode. Suddenly, their voices would change, their body language would tighten, and this invisible wall would go up. Conversations would become transactions. Connection would become networking. And I thought something was wrong with me for noticing it. Jack began to understand that what he'd been calling social anxiety was actually social intelligence. His nervous system was responding accurately to the emotional inauthenticity around him. His discomfort wasn't pathology, it was perception. This is the terrifying gift of the awakened mind. You can sense the Carl Jung shadow operating in groups. You feel the collective desperation for approval, the way people abandon themselves in real time to avoid rejection. You notice how conversations shift when certain people enter the room, how truth gets sanitized into acceptability, how genuine emotion gets performance managed into appropriateness. And because you can see it, you can't participate in it without feeling like you're betraying your own soul. Schopenhauer believed this sensitivity condemned intelligent people to perpetual loneliness. He wrote about the hedgehog's dilemma, how we need warmth from others, but get hurt when we get too close. His solution was resigned acceptance of isolation, the noble but melancholy path of the superior mind, forced to live apart from inferior company. But Jung saw the shadow differently. Instead of something to be ashamed of, the shadow becomes the gateway to authenticity. When you stop rejecting what you see, when you stop pretending you don't notice the performance, when you stop gaslighting yourself into believing that shallow interaction is deep connection, something profound shifts. You stop seeking approval from people who are themselves approval-seeking machines. The moment you stop performing empathy is the moment you start receiving it. Here's what changes when you're no longer desperate to belong, when you're not scanning the room for validation or approval, when you're not performing relatability or manufacturing chemistry. People sense something different about you. You're not trying to extract anything from them. You're not performing for them. You're not managing their emotions or managing their impression of you. You're just present. And presence, real presence, is so rare that it's magnetic. But here's the paradox that breaks most people's brains: the less you need social connection, the more authentic social connection finds you. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're finally playing yourself. Every time you choose silence over meaningless chatter, every time you choose solitude over shallow socializing, every time you choose depth over breadth, every time you honor your inner landscape instead of performing for an audience, you're practicing individuation. You're becoming who you actually are instead of who you think you should be. This is why Jung called the shadow the thing a person has no wish to be. But what if the thing you have no wish to be is false? What if your shadow isn't hiding your darkness? It's hiding your light. What if the very qualities that make you feel like an outsider are the qualities that make you most yourself? The intelligent person's antisocial behavior isn't rejection of humanity. It's rejection of inhumanity. It's saying no to the deadening of spirit that passes for normal social interaction. It's refusing to participate in the collective agreement to pretend that performance is presence, that networking is connection, that being seen is the same as being known. You've been carrying shame for seeing too much feeling, too deeply caring, too little about things that don't matter, and too much about things that do. But that shame isn't yours to carry. It belongs to a culture that has confused busyness with purpose, popularity with connection, being liked with being loved. Everything shifts when you realize that your inability to fit in isn't a character flaw, it's character strength. Look at history's most brilliant minds: Da Vinci, Newton, Tesla, Marie Curie, Virginia Woolf, Emily Dickinson. They weren't social butterflies networking their way to relevance. They withdrew not from hatred of people, but from devotion to truth. They chose their inner world over the outer world's demands because they knew something most people never discover. Solitude isn't punishment, it's privilege. Da Vinci spent months alone in his workshop dissecting bodies to understand life-designing flying machines centuries before flight was possible. Newton retreated from Cambridge during the plague and revolutionized mathematics in isolation. Tesla walked alone through New York streets, his mind alive with electrical visions no one else could see. These weren't antisocial misfits. They were selectively social geniuses who understood that depth requires solitude, that creation requires protection from the world's constant demands for explanation and approval. Jung wrote, "In the long run, no man can escape from himself without damage." This is the turning point when you stop trying to escape yourself and start excavating who you actually are beneath all the social conditioning. The Carl Jung Shadow Work isn't about becoming more likable. It's about becoming more yourself. And the more yourself you become, the less you need external validation to feel whole. The less you need consensus to feel confident. The less you need approval to feel worthy. Here's what happens in the turning point. You start to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is wanting connection and not having it. Solitude is choosing depth over breadth, quality over quantity, authenticity over approval, truth over comfort. You begin to understand that the people who matter, the ones who are also doing their own shadow work, who are also choosing truth over comfort, who are also swimming against the current of collective delusion, those people will find you. Not because you're performing for them, but because authenticity recognizes authenticity across any distance. Emma, a 35-year-old therapist, shared this insight. I used to think there was something wrong with me because I preferred deep conversation with one person over small talk with 20. I thought I was broken because I'd rather spend Friday night reading Jung than at a networking event, because I'd rather sit in nature than sit in a crowded restaurant, because I'd rather have one real friend than 50 acquaintances who know nothing real about me. Emma discovered what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox without needing to resolve it. She learned to be alone without being lonely, to be selective without being judgmental, to be protective of her energy without being defensive about her choices. This is individuation in action, becoming who you are instead of who you think you should be. And paradoxically, the more you become yourself, the more magnetic you become to others who are also seeking authenticity in a world drowning in performance. The turning point happens when loneliness transforms from punishment into privilege, when solitude transforms from exile into sanctuary, when your sensitivity transforms from liability into gift. Integration doesn't mean you suddenly become social. It means you stop apologizing for your nature and start honoring it. You learn to navigate between the collective and the individual, Jung's eternal dance. You engage with society when it serves your growth and withdraw when it threatens your authenticity. You stop seeing this as character weakness and start recognizing it as character wisdom. The Carl Jung Shadow Integration teaches you that you don't need to choose between complete isolation and complete conformity. There's a third option: conscious participation. You engage with the world on your terms, not theirs. You give your energy to what nourishes you and protect it from what depletes you. Modern trap alert: many people with large social circles, hundreds of social media connections, packed calendars, constant plans, still feel empty inside. They're surrounded by people, yet starving for connection. Proof that quantity never equals quality. That visibility never equals being seen. That being known by many is not the same as being understood by few. Think about it. How many people do you know who are constantly busy, constantly social, constantly connected, yet constantly complaining about feeling lonely? They've confused motion with meaning, activity with fulfillment, being around people with being with people. Surface-level interaction, no matter how frequent, cannot fill the soul's hunger for authentic recognition. The extrovert's nightmare, being alone with themselves, is the introvert's sanctuary. But it's not about introversion or extroversion. It's about authenticity versus performance depth, versus surface being versus seeming. Your solitude becomes an inner sanctuary, not a prison. You cultivate rich internal landscapes, books that change you, ideas that challenge you, creative projects that express you, spiritual practices that ground you, dreams that guide you, intuitions that inform you. You discover that the relationship with yourself is the foundation for all other relationships, that self-knowledge is the prerequisite for genuine intimacy with others. You learn to distinguish between different types of alone time. There's the anxious alone when you're isolated and desperately wanting connection. There's the depressed alone when you're withdrawn, because everything feels pointless. And then there's the sacred alone, when you're choosing solitude as a way of honoring your inner life, your creative process, your spiritual journey. Here's the profound shift. You stop seeking yourself in other people's responses and start finding yourself in your own presence. You stop needing external validation because you're developing internal validation. You stop performing empathy and start offering authentic compassion, not because you should, but because it emerges naturally from a full heart. The intelligent person's journey isn't about learning to fit in. It's about learning to belong to yourself first, then to the few who can meet you there. It's about discovering that your weird is someone else's normal, that your too much is someone else's just enough, that your intensity is someone else's relief. You realize that your sensitivity to social falseness wasn't oversensitivity. It was accurate perception. Your inability to engage in meaningless chatter wasn't social incompetence. It was soul protection. Your preference for depth over breadth wasn't limitation. It was wisdom. Your need for solitude wasn't antisocial behavior. It was self-preservation. The return isn't about going back to who you were before you saw through the masks. The return is about integrating what you've learned in your exile, bringing your hard-won wisdom back into conscious relationship with a world that desperately needs people who remember what authenticity looks like. You become a lighthouse for others who are lost in the fog of performance, a sanctuary for souls who are tired of pretending, a reminder that it's possible to be real in a world that rewards fakeness. You don't reject social life. You reject its shallow masks. You don't hate people. You hate the performance that prevents real people from emerging. Not caring about social life isn't antisocial. It's the beginning of individuation. It's choosing your authentic self over your acceptable self. It's choosing truth over comfort, depth over breadth, presence over performance, being over seeming. The paradox reveals itself. The more authentic you become, the more people are drawn to you, not because you seek them, but because authenticity is so rare, it's magnetic. You become a sanctuary for others who are tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of the endless theater of social expectation. Your very existence gives others permission to stop performing. Your comfort with solitude gives others permission to choose quality over quantity. Your refusal to participate in shallow interaction creates space for deeper connection to emerge. Schopenhauer saw solitude as fate, the inevitable consequence of superior intelligence in an inferior world. Jung saw solitude as transformation, the necessary crucible for becoming who you truly are. The choice is yours. Will you carry your clarity as a burden or embrace it as a gift? Will you apologize for your depth or celebrate it? Will you dim your light to make others comfortable or shine it to help them find their way? Life isn't about fitting in. It's about finding resonance with your true self, even if it means walking alone for a while. Because here's what you'll discover: you're never truly alone when you're finally home in yourself. If this truth has found you, if you recognize yourself in these words, leave "silence is power" in the comments, not because you're giving up on connection, but because you're choosing conscious connection over unconscious performance. The path of individuation isn't easy, but it's the only path that leads to yourself. And yourself, your authentic, selective, sensitive, truth-seeking self, is exactly who the world needs you to be. Welcome to the journey home.